Hello, hello, welcome back to KT2077 Kurakani conversation. This is a virtual space where individuals from various fields like art, literature, and activism share each other's work, discuss socio-politically relevant issues, and support a deeper understanding of the world. I am Silasha Razwandari. I'm co-curator in Kathmandu Triennale, and I'm here with Priyankar. He's in the curatorial team. We will be doing a short introduction, and today's speakers are Aqui Thami. She's joined us from Bombay, and Shuba Kayastha from Bhaktapur. So so our speaker will be talking about decolonization of feminist praxis today. So when we talk about feminism, we're quick to take references from the West, first wave, second wave, and the evolution it is bringing all around the world. Uh, but like whereas for many indigenous women, sexual politics is actually going backwards. Where the rights and liberty they enjoy, their individualism they had before, are now becoming taboo subjects. And there are many reasons behind it. And those Western feminist theories and praxis are not contextual in many places like South Asia, no? Where assertion of patriarchal sort of system has complex histories, like deep-rooted orthodox casteism and so on. But also on other side, there is this culture of extreme sexualization of indigenous, Dalit, marginalized woman's body, as indigenous writer Kayastha also mentions. Um, and now in the internet age, virtual spaces are becoming just another tool to sort of impose pre-existing and newly constructed patriarchal beliefs. So our speakers will be talking about these subjects with reference to their own experiences and practices. And Priyanka will be doing a short intro.
हजुर नमस्ते सबैजनालाई I'll just be introducing our two speakers. Firstly, Aqui Thami. Aqui is an indigenous artist based in Bombay, centered around the culture of DIY, self-publishing, and guerrilla poster. She believes in creating art that is grounded in the act of doing and addresses political and social issues. The core of Aki's art practice is healing, and she works with experiences of marginalization and resilience. Our second speaker is Shubha Kayastha. Shubha is a queer feminist. Her work revolves around the intersection of gender, sexuality, and technology. She is a co-founder of digital rights organization Body and Data, and Shubha is joining us from Bhaktapur. To begin off our Kurakani for today, I'll be playing a short video of Aki's. The video is of courtesy of Aki, as well as Gucci and Mixed Magazine. So,
growing up being a girl in a society where it's thought and it's believed that girls are a problem, you grow up with a lot of self-hate. You don't value yourself as a human being, so you don't let yourself reach the maximum potential of who you can be as a person. I wanted to reclaim spaces where I felt so vulnerable and so powerless. Nobody deserves to live like that, and I wanted to take my power back, and I wanted to feel whole again. It really upsets people, the messaging that is there. Everybody has gone through it. We all have similar experiences of being harassed. It's not right, it's not fine, it's not okay, it's not acceptable.
well, after that short video, I think when we were preparing for this conversation, we talked a lot about what does feminism mean in the context of South Asia, also in the Himalayas. And I think we just wanted to start with asking Shubha to also, you had a presentation ready to talk about sort of what feminism looks like or sort of means in broader discourses and even within like the development discourse in Nepal. And perhaps we can start the Kurakani from there. And Shilasha and I will head off into the background and pop back up.
Yeah. And so if you have any questions, our audience, you can please write in our Facebook Live, or you can also send us the questions, me or Priyanka. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Priyanka, for that really warm introduction, and Shilasha for hosting this space and, like time and again, bringing activists and scholars to talk about things that they talk about. Before I start my quote unquote presentation, I just have a few disclaimer to make. I just wanted to say like the things that I'll be talking about today, it's based on my multiple identity, as a feminist, as a queer person, as someone who's a Newar, someone who has been brought up in Kathmandu, who lives here, someone with a university degree. So also holding multiple identity and my collective experience. The second one is the things that I'll be talking about, sharing today is not
Suva's video just froze.
Should I start until she gets back?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there she is.
Oh, sorry, I got disconnected. I was talking about the disclaimer, maybe that's why. Just to continue on to that, and whatever we are going to talk about today, I'll be mostly be speaking in English, but I'll pull in Nepali words here and there as well. And the way I look at feminism is beyond the equality between male or female or two genders or equal right, but also being aware of how feminism is linked to patriarchy, like state and social structure around us. So to begin with, discussing about feminist praxis itself, I think we first need to understand why are we talking about feminist praxis and why the importance of decolonizing. Like feminist praxis is not something that is that might not be very new for a lot of us. We might already be living it. We might already be practicing it based on our experiences. So it's basically theories, method, knowledge about feminism that we bring into practices. And why are we talking about decolonizing and why decolonization is important at this point is because we have been continuously seeing certain notion of feminism being promoted, being like spoken about again and again. And these have developed certain kind of notion and narrative that could be limiting. So needing to pause and look into like what is actually feminism and why do we need to decolonize it is actually important. So I have like a small presentation here that I'd like to share. Give me like a second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see the slide?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do this.
Better.
So because I work in the internet, right? And like my space is that. So I did like quick search of image search of what is Nepali women in Google. And these are the images that I found. So to describe the image, there are like three women standing with their dokos with grass on their back in their red sari and solo. Other images I came across were these. The first one here in the screen is of three younger women sitting with their toddlers in their lap. And this was about talking about contraceptive to younger women. And the third infamous photo of Chow, like Chow goat. Um, so these are the depiction and the narrative that we come across whenever we imagine who are Nepali women, right? So I want to talk a bit about like how these kind of narratives and how these kind of ideas are developed. So I think Shilasha made a very good intro of like why, like from the Western perspective, there is certain kind of definition of feminism that gets promulgated, and then we kind of pick it up and then use it. So again, like from the West, from the Western perspective, from the Western feminist perspective, women from the third world, like women from country like ours, are usually seen as, like how these images depicts poor, very uneducated, usually cultural, who might not be sexually liberated, who would go and do arranged marriage, like all these kind of stereotypical notion, and thus this photo. But while I say that, I would also like to point at our own way, like how Nepali society and how our work also kind of come up with certain kind of notion of like who Nepali women are. There are always this dichotomy between urban women and rural women, right? Like who becomes urban women, and then how do we look into rural women and their suffering and how they are portrayed as usually powerless or needing emancipation. So I did another quick search of this word women empowerment, and then these are the images I came across. So to describe the image, these is from a website of Carnival. There are women sitting on the floor, and one of the women is sitting there with a chart paper and then pointing at something written on the page. Second photo I have here is of a woman with her sewing machine, looks very happy. Third, with an older woman with a young girl with a laptop on their hand, like really smiling and looking at the screen of the laptop. And the fourth photo is woman with her small chicks, like probably she is having a poultry farm or something like that, right? So what I want to say is to connect to the earlier notion of how women are viewed as usually dependent or like uneducated, and then how they are powerless, and then these group like men are always like powerful over them, kind of develop this narrative of women needing emancipation or needing some kind of skill generated, like skills or income generation activities, very limiting and very reductionist way of looking at things. And thus, these kind of programs and these kind of strategy comes in place. What I want to, why I wanted to bring this is when we do such kind of labeling, when we try to talk about women as homogeneous entity, we kind of neglect the other identity that they might hold, like ethnic, ableist, like disability, the gender identity, ethnicity, caste, many different things. And the other thing is like how these kind of reductionist and simplified notion always define production or productivity from a very capitalistic way of looking at things. Like once you have money in your hand, only if you are able to earn something, then you are looked at as empowered, quote unquote, right? So I just wanted to quickly end my presentation saying that we definitely need to decolonize the phrase Nepali women, like who are Nepali women, where our ethnic and then indigenous community and other groups fall into this notion of Nepali women and Nepaliness. And then like, where does the agency and autonomy of these women then hold when we are talking about these women being like really powerless and then like uneducated, needing some kind of support. And yeah, like I think I'll end there and then I'll join you again later. Thank you.
Um, Thank you, Shubha, for showing us those images and talking a bit about the current political climate of feminism in Nepal and in the third world or the global south. Before I start, I would like to introduce myself. So, Seva, everyone, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is really great to have your audience, and I'm grateful to Kathmandu Triennale and Shilisha, Hitman, Priyankar, and the entire team for putting this together. It is really humbling and um, like I feel honored really to have this space to talk about feminist praxis and my work and share with the larger community, and especially talking about decolonization. And in a way, I feel just having this talk is decolonial praxis, and it has been made possible by having two curators who are Himalayan natives. Because oftentimes what we see is within the decolonial articulations, there are people who hold so much power and positions in social hierarchies who are talking about decolonization. And so, like for instance, when we look at the social theory within like the global south, we see articulations around subaltern studies and post-colonial studies, where we see scholars who are already like zamindars and upper class mainland people who have tremendous power, and of course like they have spaces to talk about these aspects. But then also when we look at feminism as a social theory, and when we look at the larger canon, then we see that like the canon is in fact just white men, and it white men from very few countries again. So like they are white men from like Germany mostly, and then like we have France and the UK and the US, and these are the people who have been just like, you know, you go to any part of the world and then like you will see that their works are made relevant. And as a person living in contemporary times, I have also had to read their works and reflect upon their works. And somehow, like within their articulations and reflections, I do not see myself reflected. And it becomes exceedingly hard because like, you know, in the larger discourse you don't find your place, and then you start seeking your place and creating your place. So that has been my decolonial journey. So if you look at like the larger social science discourse, then you'll see most of it comes from Descartes, and then like his articulation around like I feel, therefore I am. And that actually like takes us back to like a lot of very problematic things around like how indigenous people were never thought of as people who feel things to start with. And that is why like we have a very brutal history of genocidal violence, cultural genocide, slavery, and to a large extent, these things are still invisibilized. There is not a lot of discourse around it, and and yeah, it is quite obvious why there hasn't been discourses around this again, because it is still the outsider who's coming and like talking about these aspects, and then they don't really see it as genocidal violence. All right, so that's a bit of theory. I don't want to be too theoretical, but yeah. Um, so in my practicing of decoloniality and practicing feminism, since I also am a student of social sciences, I am a student of feminism, I am doing a doctoral degree, and I'm an artist. So I have had the space of like reflecting on feminist thought, and I feel like there has been a great disservice of the academia in terms of uplifting works that are still hierarchical. And so there is a great, like, you know, like when you look at feminism as a practice, like it has that gap between what is practiced and what is the theoretical aspect of feminism. And then we, like, as people who are not making these discourses, you can feel like, well, I could feel the epistemic hegemony of these discourses, and that is what in fact led me into discovering and relooking. So while doing that, um, my point of starting was like going back and looking at my own life. And so I come from the Thami people of the Himalayas. We have been called the disappearing tribe. We are a people who are located in different regions within the Himalayas. So some of our peoples are in the border of Tibet and Nepal. Some of us are in Nepal. Some of us are in India. So we are scattered all around, and we are also a very small population. I think internationally we are just 20,000 people, and in India, what is known today as India, we are 5,000. So that is not a very large number. So being a Thangmi person, I have felt a kind of a distance, but even within the larger uh, indigenous peoples organizing. For instance, like it started from school when people would be asking me like, "Thami banego kya ho?" Like, what does Thami mean? So it wasn't enough that, like, you know, I'm a person in flesh, like standing right in front of them, but then they had to like really place me where I am and who I am. And it did not really help that we are a very small population. So even within the larger indigenous discourse, even within the larger indigenous organizing, there wasn't a lot of space given to our people. And growing up, I grew with a lot of sense of like de-attachment. I don't know if that's a word, but I just made it, so it's a word now. So like I felt very unattached with like the realities around me, because I grew up in a conflict zone, uh, uh, like militarized space. But I also grew up in a house which, like, my parents are both activists, so I grew up in a very rich environment where like reading and like looking at politics was like an everyday thing. So I was exposed to a lot of activism when I was growing up. But at the same time, all of these activists and all of these poets, men and women, would still not know who I am. And I think that also stemmed from the fact that my parents were also not very sure, since, like, you know, as a product of cultural genocide, like we were not allowed to practice certain things. And there is a lot of nuance in this, like the kind of hegemony and the kind of oppression that we have gone through as indigenous peoples are not just like a single fold. Like when we look at South Asia as a region, we can see like these. So when we talk about decolonizing thought, we cannot just like talk about the European colonizers coming and leaving this space. It, like, for us as indigenous people, there has been like different folds of colonizers coming in, and some of them settling here and then like taking up resources and enslaving people as well. And sometimes even within the small group of indigenous peoples as well. So like there has been a lot of conflict and colonizing between the Nevas and the Thangmis as well in Dolakha. So there are all of these like different factors to consider and to look at, and then like unpack and think. And so yeah, this is actually a great opportunity. And yeah, so it's been like a journey, because like looking back at all of these aspects, and also looking back at all of these different identities that are created, uh, like contemporary identities of like citizenship and nationhood, and what does it mean when we are looking at decolonizing. For instance, the language that we speak. So like there is Nepali and then there is Gorkhali. So like there is a clash between that, because there is an articulation of the people from uh, the hills of Darjeeling and Kalimpong, especially people who have lived under colonial plantation slavery. So I come from that space. My grandparents and my uncles and my aunts are still working in the tea garden. Our ancestral home is in the tea garden. So the language that we speak is quite a bit different from the language that is spoken in Nepal. But then, like, when you look at the language discourse, I know a bit about this because my Appa is also a poet and he writes. So there has always been this clash. So, like, thinkers from the region of Darjeeling, like Indrabad Rai, for instance, who is like very celebrated and revered, like it started with him saying that, hey, we are different, and with the Language Recognition Act in India, there was again a clash between people, between Nepali people who came and settled in the Northeast and between people who are in Darjeeling, articulating that the language that we speak is actually Gorkhali, and the larger Nepali population saying it does not. So like the language that is recognized is Nepali. So like, there is already that thing, like, and like relocating myself and like looking at decolonizing within all of these like areas and thoughts has been a journey. And so growing up, it became so imperative for me to really look at who I am to start with and reclaim my identity, and then like what it really means to be practicing within a space which is colonized and make space. So which is why like I uh, always center my work around healing and resilience, because in my experience, just to live as an indigenous person within a colonized space is already being resilient. And so that has always been my intention. And before I show you my works, I want to honor my grandmothers, Mala Rai and Kuma Devi Thami. It is from them I have drawn a lot of inspiration. And yeah, I wouldn't know how to survive if I did not have grandmothers who are as strong as they are. And I say this because when we look at strength and power and like being independent, like Shubha articulated, we often don't think of women so much, but it is quite a bit different when you look at indigenous homes, and especially like within the space of colonial plantation slavery, you will see that there is so much power within indigenous peoples and like women. um, and like even if there is a larger discourse to like the larger politics, like we are not like, as people living in contemporary times, we are not unaffected not affected by patriarchy, because we do live under the larger patriarchal system which does subjugate women. And we are affected by it, but then like that is the larger politics of outside of your house. And when you come back inside the house, there are rituals and ceremony and practices where you have to center women, where women are like the head of the family, the head of the house, especially coming from the Thangmi people. I know, like I have learned, like I did not know this as a child, but now I know that we were not a patriarchal people at all, because like there were different clans for women and men, and like uh, children, infants that were born, girls would be joining the clans of the mothers, and then boys would be joining the clans of the father, and we never had gendered roles. So now when we look at like, so when we look at like the larger feminist discourse, then we see like how it started in the West, and then it is all about like voting rights and like working rights and all of those things, which are appreciated, and like which I appreciate and I celebrate. There are important struggles, but like to employ that lens in my context, it's a bit difficult, because we had those rights. Like we forever had those rights. In fact, we were the decision makers as women. So like, you know, it's almost like you employ this patriarchal structure over us, and then you bring in the state, and then you bring in the nation state, and then you bring in the citizenship rights where you have to like write your father's name. And then you tell us that, okay, now this is feminism, and then you have to employ all these things as well to free yourself. So like to not account for what is already in practice and honor it and celebrate it, and in fact like have apparatus for diminishing a system which is already in use, and system which is like far more advanced than the system that has been given to us now. That's a bit tricky and a lot tiring. But yeah, like we're unpacking every day and articulating every day. So I'm going to show a few pictures. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen. Oh no, just give me a few minutes. Okay. Are you able to see my screen, Shubha? Okay. So like my work is mostly based around the culture of DIY, and within that I try to reclaim spaces. And so as I go through the pictures, I'm going to talk a bit about how I have been doing it and what is the intent of the work. So this one is a telephone booth in London that we reclaimed together and turned it into a zine library for people to, so the telephone booth was not in use. It wasn't being used. It was just left like that. And then there was a notice stuck there saying that this is not in use. So we thought like we just take up the space and have zines inside it. This was a site-specific performance in Teotihuacan, so-called Montreal. It was a performance that we did at night, and it is reclaiming public spaces and being explicitly sexual in public spaces. And this is Sister Library. This is one of the interventions that is one of my ongoing projects where there are works of women, and we travel to different parts of the world, and we also have a permanent physical space in Bombay. It is a space to celebrate works of women. And this is the Sister Library installation at the Goethe Institute in Dhaka, Bangladesh. This is so I do so like I am not a trained artist. I am self-taught, so my work like covers various different mediums. I also write, so this was like a collaborative project between me and 10 of my grandmothers. And 10 grandmothers because, like, you know, we have so many grandmothers, like grandmothers from like all of my family. So we went to the forest, we looked at different herbs, and then we were also looking at healing practices of our people. And this is a zine that I made on momos. I also work around food a lot. This has become a space, a site for me to claim or to decolonize. So this is one of the first zines I made. It's looking at momos. This is a Rhizo poster where, yeah, it's a. I work with posters, like Sheila Shah already said. This one is at least 5 years old. This is in a place called People's Book House, which is a communist book house in Bombay, and it's right outside that. Like, since the posters are so old now, they keep telling me to come and put up new ones. And if you see the text here, it has been written like because the print has faded now. And this is an intervention I made at this place called Tower Hamlets, which is in one of the boroughs in London, where there's a large population of first and second generation immigrants. And because of the new policies in UK with Brexit, there has been a lot of distrust amongst people who are immigrants. So this was an intervention to really locate their space and what are the contributions that they have made. It was a 2 days intensive, interactive, collaborative space where we had around 700 people come and write about their contributions to London. But it was also that space where people could stop and think, like, what is London really without us? So here's the zine library again with people interacting. This picture is from Dharavi Art Room. It is another space that I run with my partner Himanshu. Himanshu is my partner. We run Bombay Underground together, so partners in crime. This is a space in Dharavi. Dharavi is one of the densest places in the planet, and this was a collaborative project between me and 5 of the Didis who are also mothers of the kids who come to the art room. So like, because they kept asking to do something, to use the space together and also learn together, because a lot of them have been deprived of going to school since they had to like migrate very young to the city after they were married. So like we collaboratively worked on what it would be that they would like to do, and then they decided on learning photography, and the emphasis was on documenting realities of Dharavi as they see it, because it is also a site where we see tens and thousands of tourists coming in every month and documenting. And by tourists, I just don't mean like people who come for sightseeing, but also like university students and researchers. So it was like a space where they could articulate. So we made a zine and an exhibition of the images that they had taken. And this is another space of healing which I worked on during the lockdown. It is called Sister Radio. It centers indigenous, Black, and Dalit women, and we talk and women from all over the world. It's like a global space where we talk about different things, including growing up and their practice. And it's just a space to honor and celebrate the medicine and resilience that they share with us. This is in a place called Makanda in South Africa. This is a zine making, like I did a bunch of zine making with the kids there and with the adults also, but this is in a school. This is from the University of Rhodes, which is famous, I don't know, famous for fees must fall, and infamous for the policies of the university. So this was, I was there to do a bunch of classes and reflections with the students with the Department of Fine Art. So the day I reached there was a woman called Kensani Maseko who committed suicide because she was raped, and the university did not listen to her complaints, and she was faced with her rapist every day while she was at the university, and she lived with so much trauma. So we made this shrine for her that night when we arrived, and okay, like just keep this image in mind because we'll come back to it. And this is again from the postering, wheat pasting adventures in Bombay. This is a space in Dharavi again. The kids are looking at Ismat Chughtai story. Ismat Chughtai is one of the writers who has written phenomenally. She was a Bombay wala, but she's had like great impact on contemporary writing. She has influenced greats like month or two, who is like super celebrated and everybody knows him, but like very few people celebrate his month. And this is a project where I collaborated with young girls and their mothers in Dharavi, where we like the kids interviewed their mothers, and they spoke about like how they have contributed to their family and built their house as migrants in Dharavi. And oftentimes, like it would go back, like the conversations would flow back to the space where there was this like immensely valuable thing that they had and they had to sell it. So it was like the relationship that they had with this object. So like it would be like my mom had given me a set of pile anklets, or like when I got married, I got this bangri, which is like the bangles which I had to sell, and then which I had to sell to fix the roof, or like I had to do this to get a bail for this guy. And like, you know, all of these contributions are like totally forgotten. So what we did was like, after all these interviews, like the kids sat down with their mothers and then they drew these images, and then the images were reproduced using a 3D printer. So they are like not made out of gold, but then they are like transparent. So it's like coming from a space of memory, but then it was also something tactile that they could hold and feel. Yeah, so this was an exciting time for me. I really enjoyed this project. Again, zine making with the kids in Makanda. And yeah, like remember the last image. So we made the shrine at night and we put down candles and flowers. And this was at the the main gate of Rhodes University. And this is what they did the next morning. So like, you know, there's a person who died in the university and you destroy her shrine the next morning. Like you won't even honor her for even a night. This is again from one of the university teaching exchange space. This is from Bombay Zine Fest, which is again a collaborative space where hundreds of zine makers come together and show their work. We have this event once every year. We've already had the Bombay Zine Fest for 2020 in January, and it's a great space now. For years, we've been working around zine making and trying to keep the underground independent space alive, and it is not funded by anyone. It is independent. Anyone can come and participate. The zines are sold at a nominal cost, but it's also a space which allows for the maker and people interested in art and writing to come together and exchange without having a third person, a middleman, a market in between. Because like we see more and more that like the commerce has become like, you know, that space in art which does not allow you to do things. Coming back to the practice of food, this is intervention in London again, where people were invited to come and eat biryani. I spent some time with the women there who formed a collective with me called DIY Rabbits, because it was at a space called Rabbits Road in East London. So there are a bunch of different like diaspora shops selling biryani, and like, you know, the relationship that they have with biryani and the recipe that's passed down, and how like they get the ingredients for biryani. And sometimes they're so specific about bringing it from Karachi itself, like this one particular ingredient has to come from Karachi, or it has to come from Punjab and things like that. So like there were a bunch of different biryani spaces. There's like Dhaka biryani, Karachi biryani, Hyderabadi biryani, all these different spaces. And then like there was one thing that like brought all these spaces together, the fact that they were selling biryani, but they were also like trying to create that space in London. And like so I invited people to come and eat and like celebrate these spaces. I also had one of the chefs come and talk to the people, because like, you know, in terms of like accessing knowledge, produced by people who are not within universities, like who are not necessarily like involved in knowledge production. It is not even thought of as knowledge. So it's very important to create these spaces and like be like, do you think this is knowledge? Like, is it worthy enough? Like, why do you think this is not knowledge? And then like really unpack that. Yeah, so this is eating biryani again. This is from the momo zine. I also made clay momos with it, which was like true to form, and then it was like true to size. This is from wheat pasting adventures again in Bombay. You know, it's extremely difficult to do wheat pasting as a woman because of the content of the work. I have had to run away a lot, like been harassed a lot. Yeah, this is in Teotihuacan, so-called Montreal. So I made tong, which is rice beer, at my studio. So it was celebrating the knowledge and the science that goes beyond indigenous food. And so I was talking with my mother and my grandmothers constantly, and then like refining the recipe and then preparing tong in my studio. And like it was so great to see like this space totally getting transformed with the smell and the energy. Um, and yeah, like towards the end of it, I shared it with people who visited. This is a zine fest in Teotihuacan. And this is a zine that we made together in London. It's a collaborative zine. It was on home and finding home in London, finding belonging. So like, if you remember the image I showed of like participatory poster intervention, this is a space called Lansbury Micro Museum. It is in Crisp Street. It is a tiny museum run by Victoria and Albert Museum. So the posters that we did was like pasted all across the museum. And so like the people who wrote on the poster, they were invited to like stick it, or like we would paste it on the wall. And this was displayed like that. This is another poster intervention in London. This is us taking over Victoria, no, what's it? Victoria Terminus, sorry. Victoria Terminus is also known as CST, Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus. So we took over VT station and stuck posters and invited women. So if you see those like tiny cards, then these are all testimonies of women and how they are restricted accessing public space. We often have this, like, I think within South Asia, we have this like image of Bombay being like a very liberating space. It is. I will not deny that Bombay is a really great space. I do not feel the same when I'm traveling in other spaces, other cities in South Asia, but it has problems too. So this was the space where they were talking about incidences that they have faced, which curtails them from accessing public space. This is in Dharavi Room again, which has a library. Kids come and read. They experiment with art making. This is in South Africa. This is making posters collaboratively. And this is one of the posters that, this is from one of my ongoing projects where I reclaim spaces where I have been harassed. This is from Art Room. This drawing and, okay, this image is from Aotearoa, so-called New Zealand, in Tamaki Makaurau, so-called Auckland. Yeah, it is a great space to like actually connect with Indigenous women and elders. And if you look closely, then she's holding my zine called Boju, which has been one of the most important spaces, like where I go back and relook. And it was, you know, it's quite unbelievable how this zine came to me. Like it was one evening where I sat down and finished this zine at one go. Like it was just like a couple of hours, and it almost felt like, so because the zine is about like the things our grandmothers would want to say to say to us. And then like by boju, I don't know how it is in Nepal, but like for us as like as peoples, as indigenous peoples in Darjeeling, like we also call the forest our boju, and like, you know, the spirit of the forest our boju. So like our actions are guided by the spirit in the forest, like so our like matriarch. So it almost felt like, you know, there's some energy that was flowing through me, and I could just finish the zine in like just a couple of hours. And it has been that space where I often go back and read. And yeah, it empowers me. I feel great every time I look at it. uh, this was made around the time uh, the discourse around citizenship was happening in India, where people are looking at citizenship policies. But then it's just like, you know, it's just like this very bipartisan way of looking at it. It's like Hindu-Muslim conflict. And then there is actually no looking at indigenous people and what the land that we inhabit mean to us. And so like every time I would articulate about indigenous people and what it means, I would be called xenophobic and like a lot of things like that. So I made this work to really tell that no, we are not ceded land. If you look here, you'll see this poster, which is Devi Mayatami. She is a woman from Dholaka, also a nettle picker by profession. And I don't know if you can see it, but then it says Jal, Jungle, Zameen, which are the three things, which are the three things that I think indigenous peoples across the globe are fighting to keep autonomous. And this is my face when I have to, I am faced by like larger political discourse, or where I have to respond to failure and crisis of the larger feminist movement, or when I read about decolonial thesis. This is the image from Bombay Zine Fest this year. These are all the participants of Bombay Zine Fest. And I think we are a full circle. Okay, so like in all of these images, you see a common thing of collaboration and like re-articulation, reclaiming, and working with people. And I think like for me, um, decolonizing has been that, like it has been like restoring indigenous ways of living. And so for me, it, like of course, there is a difference between decolonizing and indigenizing, but for me, it does come together. And it like every day, like with everything that I do, it has become extremely important for me to collaborate with people and not just think about myself alone individually when it comes to healing, because like we don't do that. Like, you know, that is not in our culture. There's been a lot of like pressures from everywhere. And like, you know, within the larger discourse of things around mental health and healing and all these spaces, you often see that you're asked to go to a therapist and you're asked to spend time alone, or you're asked to exercise, and then it is just believed that you'll come back and the system is going to uphold you and celebrate you, and you're going to be fine, you're going to fit perfectly fine inside in the system. And that does not actually work for people like us, because like the system is created to, like, you know, harm us. And so like how do we beat it? Like, you know, you, when you do not fit in, you, the system is created for you to not fit in. How do you create a space where you fit in? And that space can only be created by indigenizing and decolonizing. And these practices are possible by coming together and collaborating and paying attention to your personal healing, but also healing of the community that you are in. Sorry, that is long, but that's it. I'm done. Yeah.
Thank you, Akshi. Shall we also hear from Shuba about decolonizing and indigenizing the internet spaces and projects she's done?
Sure. Thank you so much, Aki. That was really wonderful. And I remember, like the only time we have met so far was during this giant fest, right? Like in Tamil, in one of the corner where we were displaying designs, and I visited. It was quite nice. And the thing that we're mentioning about citizenship and how that has been a struggle for a lot of communities, given our state is so patriarchal, and then like for Nepal, we were not colonized as per se from the external forces, but there has always been like colonial power exists, like even now. So communities in the Madhesh, a lot of indigenous communities, we are always in the verge of like being marginalized further and further. Um, yeah, I wanted to also talk a bit about like how then are we trying to decolonize the online space, because in the offline world, in the offline spaces, there are not many places that we can feel safe and then voice out, because it's like really dominated by certain forces, certain voices, right? And these online spaces that are not that old, and they are like opportunity now to actually like intervene in the beginning itself, and also to decolonize like what is not okay. So in that term, like that's how we started Body and Data, the organization that I'm part of, to basically provide an internet, to make an internet as free and then open, safer place for everyone. And when I say like an organization, Body and Data, so we call ourselves a feminist organization. And being an organization as an entity of non-government organization and making it feminist is such a struggle in itself, because organization, like any setup, any structure, is kind of corporate. Like there is a hierarchy, there is a kind of power structure that is embedded whenever you start anything. So that itself is one of the things that we have been trying to see how to make the space, the organizing itself, to make it more feminist rather than just the product. And that's the other thing, like usually in this kind of capitalistic era, there is so much focus on what is the outcome that you bring. So a lot of emphasis is on the product, right, rather than the process itself. So I'm also part of like other collectives like Chowkhat. There's another queer collective, and we are keep being like we are being questioned all the time. So are you not doing anything? Are you doing any work? Meaning they mean like external activity based, right, rather than things that happens within the person, within small collective, within small groups, that is not exactly seen as work. And I think we need to decolonize that as well. Like why this emphasis and pressure to produce all the time. And I think COVID has taught us so much, right? Like the disability justice movement that has been telling us like productivity should not be dependent on like producing stuff, like the outcome itself. So I think that is something we need to learn. Definitely. And to talk a bit about the work of Body and Data. So the idea is to create a feminist internet, right? And when I say that, like, why is the question that usually comes up? People usually ask me, "It is why about the internet पनि feminist चाहियो तिमीहरूलाई हैन like सबै कुरा feminist चाहियो." That's the question and the critique that we hear quite often. So I just wanted to flag a bit like why do we actually make the internet feminist? Because internet as itself and digital space itself is not created to talk a lot about, let's say, human right or like social justice. They are platforms. They are like corporate platforms to make money, right? Like to start to it. And then like because it is not made to talk about social justice and like how we use it at the moment, a lot of infrastructure and how it's built is usually misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic. There's a lot of like hate speech going on. Like a lot of us might have experienced it ourselves. Like usually like a lot of online crime that happens, like intimate photos and videos get shared without people's consent. Just recently there was an article in Kantipur, a paper like our national daily, of how this one person, this one woman got really viral about like information about this one woman that she had left her 4-month old child with her husband to make her career. And the YouTube journalism, quote unquote, they actually made her life really difficult. There was a lot of slut shaming that happened, for in the course of like many months. So a lot of like injustice that happens in this space as well. And like I was saying earlier, a lot of technology is built by white, cisgender, heterosexual male who are like usually rich, right, from the West. So that is why like how we are using it and what we need is the thing that we need to talk about. Um, and then usually in our kind of countries, like developing countries, technology is seen as a savior. So whenever something happens, like technologists would come and say like, hey, so you need like more technology, like more digital means to solve all these problems. So we kind of look up to this tech utopia that is going to come and then solve all our problem. Whereas like technology is not built by people across different caste, class, ethnicity, like definitely not from people from our part of the world. So that is how the human values and the realities and experience somehow gets missed, right? And then that is why the feminist internet. So I'm going to talk a bit about like, so what are we doing in terms of, our little effort to make internet more feminist and to decolonize this online space is talking about how online spaces and digital platforms keep censoring certain kind of voices, right? Like in, let's say in Facebook, Instagram, like these kind of platform, women's bodies are seen as obscene. Like usually women's bodies part are usually not, it's usually censored. Like women's nipple, for example. Nepal government banned pornography in 2018. So that is like kind of censoring internet, like, like not providing you full internet in the name of protecting women. So they usually use the language of protecting women and children to curb our right to access free internet, right? And whereas internet is so powerful, like we use it to get information, to connect, to express ourselves, to explore our sexuality, and for activism as well. No, it's such a powerful and important tool that we have. So what we kind of do is we run workshops to talk more about these nuances of internet and digital spaces, because yes, it's awesome, it's great, but at the same time there are other factors that could be sanctioned by our state and government, but also by all these like platforms, right, like the big tech giant companies, of how they are also not providing us all the right we are supposed to get. I would like to show a couple of maybe photos here. Let me check. So what we also kind of do is talk about, can you see it, Aki?
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of, we try to talk about this, patriarchal setup of how internet system works in a more accessible language from our context. So at the moment, we're talking about more privacy and data privacy, because data is something that is seen as new oil, right? And that is very scary thing, because oil is oil, it's natural resources. But here, how corporates and governments are treating our information, our personal information, a lot of data that we hand it over to corporates and to the government, trusting them, are being used to actually mine and use it for their benefit or for corporates' benefit. So we're trying to talk about that in more nuanced way. For example, we have like a couple of comics here that we develop. I'll maybe show one. So here like is a comic. It's basically, we did it ourselves in the office among the team, of how, because there were series of events of photos and videos that were being leaked without consent of young girls over like this Reddit page and in boys lockers room in India during the same time. So here we are trying to talk about data privacy, but in more contextual setting of how people keep sharing their intimate images or content of someone to other people, right? So here this dude is basically asking someone else to send like nude of their girlfriend. Whereas like in the second poster, we are basically saying there's like a basically chat conversation between two people. Like one is asking to send and the other one is like, no, I'm not going to do that. So basically respecting the autonomy and then the consent, right? Just to give another example here is we're talking about how these big giants, like tech giants like Google or like other apps that we have on our phone, use our information, and we kind of trust them. We give them consent, but usually that is not like full informed consent. And when we actually install these apps and we trust them, they usually they kind of misuse the information to track our location, and they tell us like it's free, but it's like how free it is the question.
Shuba, you might want to repeat that because you are frozen now, but you were also frozen a bit when you were talking about it.
Can you see the poster?
Yeah, you're fine now.
Yeah, I was saying like usually the platform that we use. Okay, that's good. So I was saying like how in terms of data privacy, the conversation usually happens more in like a higher level in policy formation process. But when it comes to like people, like we are not told honestly by, there is no transparency there. Citizen and government and corporates, right? So we, a lot of people might not know that for small background search, we have found that a lot of data that the government offices in Nepal is collecting, including the driving license detail or like from voters ID, like everything is being data mined. And then there are like corporates, like few individuals, powerful people who are close to the government accessing all this information, right? So what is going to happen to the information, and how is that going to implicate to Nepali citizens then? And usually in these kind of processes, who actually are marginalized further are human rights activists, indigenous activists, like artists. There's a lot of curtailing of artistic freedom as well that has happened for last couple of months, years, like many years. So these groups that are usually against the state are also are further marginalized. I'm gonna now stop the screen share and I will go through the Instagram and other social media platform that we'll be linking here that we use to talk about other kind of social issues.
Shuba, you're frozen.
Shubha? Mm. Okay, she totally froze.
Maybe until
Can
she
you hear me
comes.
now? I have turned off my video.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll turn off my video for now then. Sorry.
Oh, it was so nice to see you though. Okay.
I know. So like all these like policy making spaces about, because it's technology related and people might not see it's directly linked to our lives and our day-to-day experiences, but how they are kind of giving power to certain people, certain states. So that's the other process we try to intervene in terms of talking about more policies. And also the other part is when we're talking about policies, when we're talking about different kind of spaces online, to respect the agency of the people, right? Usually a lot of there is a lot of discouragement of talking about sexuality and then talking about our bodies. So we definitely emphasize on like how talking about our bodies and taking agency within that is very important. So so we kind of mix sexuality and internet right together. So one of the things that we have been doing and had done is like providing security tools and security safety tools to younger people, women and queer folks, which means like if I want to express myself and my sexuality online, how to do it anonymously, let's say, that would not be misused later, how to do safer sexting or like video call in a way that discussion around
Your voice is getting disconnected. Shubha, we've lost her.
Yeah.
Are there any questions or things that we can talk on until she's back?
So we do have some questions.
Yeah, we have a few questions. We can sort of start with one that was brought up in the discussion. It's related with both yours and Shubha's presentation. Thank you for such wonderful presentations. This one is by Haushala. Once Shubha is back, I think we might need to repeat bits of the question again for her. Her comment and question goes, how important is it to discuss about the history in consideration to the lack of representation and recognition of women in color? The Black communities have played a vital role in suffrage movements, yet their stories rarely reach here. Same goes to indigenous women in movements in the history of Nepal and India, as well as where their stories are unheard. Why are their stories hidden? Is it because those who hold the writing and planning lack to see because they are not from indigenous communities?
It is like, obviously, like you've answered the question. It is like the epistemic hegemony, the violence of epistemic hegemony. The gatekeeping is real. I have experienced it. I'm sure you guys have experienced it as well as indigenous peoples, to the extent that recently, like when I'm doing a lot of these calls, my name is not mentioned while they want me to do free labor and talk about art practice and feminist art practice, like to the extent of like not mentioning my name, but just mentioning Sister Library as this like great emancipatory space and a space for women and like the first feminist library in South Asia, blah de da, community owned, but no mention of Aqui Thami, like totally invisible. So I can imagine how like difficult it has been for our elders and for our foremothers, and for our elders who are men as well, for our forefathers. Oftentimes when we think about like the larger feminist movement, we see like this the patriarchy, the larger patriarchy, and all men are evil. But then like we cannot forget the specificity within that, where like indigenous men are also like treated horribly as like non-human beings who feel no pain, and that is why you enlist them in the army. And like, you know, yeah, and yeah, those horrible realities cannot be discounted, cannot be hidden. We have to be mindful of it. But shit, I totally lost your question. But yeah, like I don't know. I don't quite want to talk about women of color because I don't really relate to that identity. But as indigenous peoples, and because I have read Black women, I think like specifically like African American women, their writings have been so instrumental in how I have cultivated my worldview. So yeah, definitely, like their works are not celebrated. It is a deliberate exclusion. Yeah, which is sad. Like it's your loss. Like, you know, if you want to widen your thinking, you better read women and different women. And as far as like representational politics is concerned, I'm also like very wary of the kind of politics where you're like, oh, um, now let's have an indigenous woman do this very oppressive thing. And like, I mean, like, I don't want that. And I feel like Toni Morrison, mother, amazing women, total icon. She has very beautifully written in the book called The Bluest Eye, where she talks about a doll, and like, you know, a doll is given to a Black child, and then like how the child does not relate to this doll at all, and she does not even want to play with the doll because, like, you know, playing with a doll is also trying to like condition you, socially conditioning you into becoming a mother. and the child does not relate to this doll at all because it is a white doll. But also, like, in my own reflection, the answer to this is not making a black doll so that the child is relating to becoming a
Mhm.
black mother. The answer to this is like not have this social conditioning where like young girls are not conditioned into becoming mother. Like motherhood is not something which is like forced down our throats. So like representational politics is like a very like it's a difficult path to walk because it is important, but like what are you wanting representation for? Like what does your representation mean? Yeah,
I
that's what I.
think that's a very good point. Again, Shubha and I talk a lot about this. Is like, is all representation good representation? And Shubha's back. We are just talking about. There was a question that was given about like why narratives of indigenous and women of color are not highlighted and often get hidden. Is it because like those who have the power in writing and like discourses and the spreading of narratives control access to such information? And I think adding on to the representation question, Shubha, you and I previously had also talked about how in Nepal, I guess particularly on YouTube, there's a lot of content created on like representation or like understanding of like gender-based violence, even rape, and representation of queer individuals, even like online abuse. And a lot of these discourses do happen, but often they can be in problematic ways. So if you want to add on to that.
No, for sure. And that's such an important question, right? We can have a different like conversation on this on its own as well. And I want to link my, the photos that I was showing in the beginning of the conversation today of how narratives are developed, not just by the external forces, but also within us, like how we talk about certain things, right? Like here in this case, indigenous communities. So in that case, I think building more stories and building more narratives, giving space to people who are not having voice, and those who already have voice to step back. And that usually doesn't happen because people who have the space and voice, they keep taking a lot of spaces, and that is somewhat not really useful for those who might not. And also this whole idea of like, oh, I will go there and give voices to people is something a bit flawed. Like no one needs a savior, right? This is like very savior mentality that we might have as like people across different area of work. That needs to be like, we need to let go of that savior mentality of we being the voice of other people, or we trying to go and talk to other people to give them voice. That's very flawed and problematic as well. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. That is again like re-employing the same. That is why I feel like there has to be a very conscious understanding of what decolonizing really means. Because if you are like going to employ the same model which was practiced upon us by like white saviors or like the Arya saviors, then like you are becoming an Arya savior. Even though you are an indigenous person, you are becoming a white savior. And within that context also, like decolonization and decolonizing is like an ongoing project for me, like process for me, because it's not like I'm talking about like things that have happened in the past and things are not happening. We are constantly being decolonized, we are constantly being colonized by social theories, and even like a lot of big ideas and words that are thrown to us which are very America specific, or like the global north specific. And like they're just like shoved into us, and then we have to fit within this space, like within this word. And I'm just like, I don't know, like I'm not that, just leave me alone. Yeah.
Yeah. And talking about
Yeah.
technology, also like how the voices to the AI are given of the female, and then there's this again the stereotype of female following, being submissive and following orders. This is again very problematic. Um, we have a comment from Amod Rai. In my understanding, when we start to talk about colonization, then our mind is already colonized to decolonization. We need to develop narrative from our own values and background in the human development system that can help to bring new ideas and theory which can overcome the colonized culture or system. Again, talking about the um, in, be inclusive of our own values and own narratives and our own system. so in relation to that, I mean, the challenges you face when you try to talk about your own values, and both of you, to be in that position when you're almost going against the current. I'm Shubha, if you like to share something, the hate comments you get.
Yeah. No, that's an important point. Thank you, Amod, for the point. I think while we are in the process of thinking of decolonizing something, it's important also to understand how we are being colonized, right? Like in what ways, by whom, is it the history, is it also at the moment, at present, given present, like how Aki was saying. We need to understand what's going on around us and then to sit down and process how to decolonize, right? And how I was saying earlier, I would like to stress again, it need not happen only in like outside space. It needs to happen within us, in our own heads, like, you know, in our small groups and collectives. And in terms of like online spaces, I don't know, it's like the longer battle, right? And what I wanted to say earlier before I got disconnected was when there are like online crimes, hate speech against different groups. For example, you would see a lot of discussion between feminists and, let's say, people who don't really like feminists or like feminist values, right? So all these like arguments, discussion that happens online, who profits out of it is another discussion that we're yet to happen. It's actually these platforms that are made to actually have these arguments, to have more polarized view. So that the more data is generated, the more points are generated, they are actually profiting out of it, right? The argument and the hate speech and the crime like that happens. So there's also a bigger game behind why people say something and then how these platforms keep encouraging these kind of debate and discussion, right? And in 2021, like our election is coming up and we have seen what happened during election in India and of course in the other countries of how these tech giants had such a big role in terms of building more polarized views about any topic, right? Let's just forget even feminism, even like on bigger topics, and the citizens get divided and then the divide and rule game again goes on and on.
And then in terms of like the challenges you personally face and the organization you're running you face, and what are kind of coping mechanism in a way, like both of you sort of, how do you cope with it?
Shubha, do you want to go first?
I can try. I mean, that's for us, we do a lot of reflection. So every now and then, like our team would sit down and then we kind of reflect of what we are doing and then trying to align with the larger values and the aim that we are there for, and also revisiting that, right? Because sometimes you might hold some values and then you might have some kind of ideas, but that might change over the time. So not having this fixated idea of like, okay, this is what we want to do and this is how it's done, but being more flexible and being more open to more like discussion. So basically a lot of reflection, I would say. And that is what I meant by decolonizing process within ourselves. Like, what are we doing? Are we doing things the way that we wanted to do? Are there things we want to do things differently now? So yeah, a lot of that. And also kind of challenging the corporate way of looking at how organizations should run. So given we are in like body and data itself is a structured organization, right? Like there are people in different positions and different kind of role and responsibility. So acknowledging that there is a power hierarchy and power structure, not saying that, oh, we don't believe in power and there is none of the power structure and values, but acknowledging there is, and acknowledging that like I probably might have more power in certain kind of circumstances, and how I use it, and then how it's been done. The process itself is something we try and we are trying to do. Let's say, I don't know how successful we have been so far.
Yeah, like for me, because like it's not really an organization as such, because these are like the spaces that I run are mostly like artist run centers or like intervention spaces as far as sister library is concerned. With Bombay Underground, it's a collective, so it is very free flowing. But as an indigenous person, I do feel debilitating pain sometimes because there is no understanding, and I am subjected to a lot of violence, especially when I have to make sure that I am given space. And, like we live in a racist, patriarchal world, and we have these things that are internalized, even ourselves and like people around us. So to have to do this like constant teaching and like constantly teaching people not to be racist, it is tiring, and I am always tired, and I'm angry and I'm hurt. But at the same time, there is also so much pressure because of uh, gendered norms where I have to be soft and pleasing as a woman. So yeah, it is a difficult space, and within this space as well, articulating as an independent artist, very mindfully keeping my practice independent, not participating in the market driven art world. That is another big battle in itself. So, yeah, it is really hard. And how I cope with it is by eating indigenous food. Food is medicine. So I often ask my mom to pack me a lot of sisnu, which is nettle. My grandma just sent me a bunch of dried tama, which is bamboo shoot. So these are nourishing for me, my soul and my body. It connects me back to the mountains. And talking to my elders is another space. I speak to my mom and my dad every day. I listen to the conversations that they are having also, sometimes in silence. I just let them talk to each other, reflect on the current geopolitics of the world, and talk to other indigenous peoples, look at their reclaiming and reasserting their indigeneity. Gives me power and strength. And yeah, just calling my grandmothers once in a while to remind myself that what I am going through is nothing really. Like, they survived plantation slavery. um, yeah, so like those are the things that help me cope. In the mainland, what else? Nature is important. Going to the samundar, to the sea once in a while, just having the opportunity to witness closeness with the indigenous peoples of this land, the Koli community. Yeah, that is life giving as well. So yeah, working in community majorly, like I feel like my practice is so community based because I wouldn't be able to do art any other way. Like, I just can't see myself being a studio artist where I make something and then, like, after 3 months, I'm like, voila, look at my work. Like, I couldn't do that. So that's how I cope, I guess.
There's a related question that was just posted concerning that. I also think given the time, this might be the last question we'll take from the audience. This question is from Apurva Raj. They say, thank you so much for the discussion and work. Can I ask a bit about your experiences and opinion on the accessibility of feminist discourse and language of decolonization, often quite complicated and volatile? What kind of work needs to be done to make sure that these conversations are actually reaching marginalized communities and engaging everyone in, say, wider policy making and representation? Because we're also trying to avoid savior complexes as well, right? Anybody?
You
It's
can
such
go
a big
first, Shubha.
question. No, I was thinking how we were struggling to find Nepali translation of our topic today. It was such a pain to actually even find word in our own language when we say decolonization. And even the word feminism is translated to Mahilabad in Nepali, and feminism is not Mahilabad, right? Women, it's not about women. It's like I said earlier, it's about the system, it's about the whole our relationship with the state. It's not just about gender equality, like between this like equality between men and women. And whereas the question in terms of how to make it accessible, I think first, like I think people are already doing a lot of stuff in terms of decolonizing, and putting their own feminist praxis into practice, right? Like there are things that are already happening all over the world, in our rural areas, in our own communities, in our own house, in our own kitchen. It's just a matter of whether or not we are framing them within this larger discussion around decolonizing, right? They might already be that. And that is why we were stressing on like how these theories and literature that are built mostly from, West, from like white people and within like four walls of university are very limiting, and why the discussion and the discourse need to be widened and not just be limited to that. So I think things are already happening. And then whenever it comes to like going to marginalized community and talking about it, or like, I think rather than like us going to marginalized community and talking to them about what is decolonization, I think that's like, again, we need to decolonize that part as well. I guess. Yeah, thank you.
I feel like there is an awareness of like decolonial thinking. Like people are thinking like in terms of like how we are colonized as people and how we are different as people. And I don't know how true that is to Nepal, but like looking at Darjeeling specifically, and now like having lived in Bombay for 10 years and working with different, collaborating with different people facing systemic violence, I can definitely say for sure that, yeah, people have that awareness. It's just that the terms and the terminology that is used in university is different from the terminologies that are used within peoples who are talking about these things. And yeah, like I think for decolonizing, it is not like, oh, like even for feminism for that matter, like, we don't really have to go and teach feminism to our mothers and our grandmothers. Like I have like no haysiyat in Hindi. I don't know what it is in Nepali. Haysiyat? Like I I am no one to teach my mother feminism because she is like super powerful, and I would never be able to be as powerful as she is. Witnessed militarization, fought against paramilitary and military, has witnessed a lot of state sanctioned violence and fought against it. So I mean, like, if that's not feminist, and if I have to go and teach her, okay, sit down, I'm going to teach you what feminism is all about, it's going to be so wrong. So like even before knowing what feminism is, I already knew what it was because of the praxis. Like women were already empowered, they are already powerful, they are great, they are celebrated, so, and free, like, they wear what they want to wear. So yeah, like in fact, the thought that like, oh, we must go and liberate these people, and oh, we must go and teach them decolonial thinking, is somehow coming from a place of like privilege and entitlement of sorts, because like, what makes you think like they have no idea of decolonial thesis? Like, how are you like aware of that? Yeah. Having said that, I feel like there needs to be space within the academia where we invite people to take up these spaces, because oftentimes, like, not oftentimes, it's always like the can and again, like, Descartes, Marx, all these men, or like within the Indian, like South Asian discourses, academic discourses, who are these people? The subaltern studies people and Guha and all these people. So like, I mean, that needs to stop, and we need to create spaces. So if you are in a space, if you are in a powerful position where you can allow for your grandmother to come and sit and like talk to people, make that happen, make that work, especially if you have inherited wealth, inherited property. Share that. This, there's never been a better time to give up the inherited wealth you have, especially if you have read and understood Decolonizing. It has to be practiced. It's not just about like reading. Yeah.
So we're actually coming to the end, and it was like really amazing discourse and like talk, but it's like ongoing, and it's also actually very new, this sort of talk, you know, to be proud of our own identity, but it's also very violent space also, and therefore there's a huge necessity need to have a safer space, to have a collaborative efforts, to join hands. And I mean, Nepal also, like, it's only after like 2000s, I mean, the discourse was there, of course, but then only after that people were really owning up their indigenous identity or marginalized identity. So actually it's very new. And before this discussion also, we were talking about how all around the world, like never before in the history, like people are coming together, and it's actually in the timeline, in the history, it's actually very exciting moment, and let's own it.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any last note? You want to say anything? Otherwise, we're coming to the end.
Celebrate indigenous women every day. Yeah, and thank you guys for doing this. It's been amazing. It's been lovely. I'm so glad to have this space.
Yeah, thank you for creating this space. I always like suck at the last word thing, so I'll just skip that for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Time. Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's really valuable. And thank you all our audience for your valuable comments. We'll definitely share them with our speakers. And thank you very much, Kathmandu Triennale team, for all the behind the scene work. Thank you, Luniba, for all the coordinations and designs. Our curatorial team, artistic director, directors, and chairperson, all of you. We will have another discussion in after about 3 weeks. Take care, stay powerful. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.